There are places where dreams suffocate before their first breath, places where hope is treated like a fragile luxury few can afford. In one such forgotten corner of the nation, a young girl rose each morning, knowing the world had already decided her fate. Yet she carried a stubborn ember inside her, a flame so small it should have died, and yet so fierce it refused to surrender. In a land where tomorrow offered nothing new, she dared to quietly believe in something more. In the isolated village of Ugwuta, life unfolded under the heavy weight of need. Poverty wasn't just a condition, it was a landscape, shaping every sound, every gesture, every breath. The cracked earth of the fields revealed years of disappointment, and the air always held the scent of struggle, an invisible force pressing against the villagers' backs. Amid this harsh setting lived Adora, a young girl whose presence carried an unusual mixture of gentleness and unspoken resolve. Her family moved through each day with the measured patience of people who had learned to stretch little into enough, even when enough never truly came. Her father clung to his farming tools as if his belief could persuade the reluctant soil to yield, while her mother stitched her strength into every task, hoping it would hold the household together. For Adaora, childhood was not a season of freedom, but a long apprenticeship to survival. She rose before the sun, stepping into tasks requiring more strength than her small frame should have held. The weight of clay water pots, the heat of cooking fires, and the long walks to gather firewood shaped her into someone older than her years. Yet in the quiet moments between chores, she carried herself with a calm curiosity that set her apart. She lingered near the schoolhouse whenever she could, absorbing scraps of knowledge with a hunger the teachers could not ignore. Books became her sanctuary, doors into worlds unscarred by scarcity, where people shaped their destinies instead of surrendering to them. Her mother noticed this spark in her, nurturing it with stories whispered at night when lantern light softened the edges of their suffering. These stories spoke of women who rose from hardship not through miracles, but through relentless will and quiet intelligence. Adaora listened as though each tale were a prophecy meant for her alone. Every word planted something deep within, a vision of possibility, fragile but undeniable. It wasn't that she believed she would escape poverty, it was that she refused to believe poverty was all she could inherit. Still, the village had a way of reminding her that dreams were unwelcome guests. Conversations among adults echoed with resignation, and children grew up quickly, learning to accept limitations before they even knew how to challenge them. But Adora's silence was not resignation. It was observation. She studied the rhythm of the village, the unchanging patterns of survival, and the subtle moments when people's eyes revealed how much they wished life had been different. She did not judge them. She simply understood that she could not allow the same rhythm to claim her. As she grew older, the weight of the family's struggles deepened. Her father's once confident steps became slow and measured, marked with a kind of unspoken sorrow. Her mother's smiles, though still warm, began to carry a tiredness that frightened Adaora more than any hunger ever had. She tried to shoulder more responsibilities, hoping to lighten the burdens pressing down on her parents, but the tides of poverty were relentless. The house, once filled with soft laughter and nightly stories, grew quieter, as though bracing itself for a storm no one wanted to acknowledge. Then her mother's health began to falter. At first it was a small cough, nothing significant, nothing alarming. But over the following weeks, the cough deepened, lingering like an unwelcome shadow in the corners of their home. Adaora observed her mother's attempts to disguise her weakness, watched her push through pain with grace that bordered on heartbreaking. Her father offered gentle reassurances that convinced no one. The air inside their home shifted, heavy with unspoken fear, as though everyone sensed that something irreversible was approaching. The village nights grew colder, and the silence around their home thickened with uncertainty. Adaora stayed close to her mother, helping with chores she once did effortlessly, trying to ignore the chill that crept into her heart each time she heard that cough. In the stillness of those nights, she found herself praying for the first time, not for opportunity or education, but simply for time. Time to understand, time to prepare, time to hold on to the life she knew. But destiny doesn't wait for readiness, nor does it soften its arrival. And on a night thick with dread and unanswered prayers, a moment came that shattered the world she knew, forcing her toward a future she never imagined she would have to face. There are moments in life when grief becomes a doorway, pushing a person into a world they never asked to enter. For Adaora, losing her mother did not simply wound her, it tore open the ground beneath her feet and forced her to walk toward a destiny she did not yet understand. The village, once familiar and predictable, suddenly felt like a place where every breath reminded her of what had been taken away. And on the night she realized nothing in her life would ever return to what it once was, the path ahead began calling with a quiet, haunting insistence she could no longer ignore. The days following her mother's death carried a kind of silence that felt heavier than sound. Their home, once warmed by soft laughter and gentle stories, now sat under a blanket of emptiness that seemed to thicken the air. Adaora watched her father try to keep the family afloat, but grief had carved exhaustion into his face and slowed his movements. Every morning he left to work the fields, returning with shoulders lowered and eyes clouded by the hopelessness he tried so hard to hide. The crops barely grew, the debts did not shrink, and the sense of loss only deepened the cracks in their already fragile world. What frightened Adaora the most was not hunger. She had known hunger all her life, but the slow unraveling of her father's confidence. He began speaking less, sleeping less, eating less, as though her mother's absence had stolen not only his partner, but also the small piece of hope he had been holding on to for years. Adaora tried to do more, taking on chores her mother once handled effortlessly, but her efforts could not replace what grief had taken. The home felt colder, the nights darker, and the future more uncertain than ever. By the time distant relatives offered to take in her younger siblings, Adaora understood that survival required sacrifice. She watched her siblings leave with tearful goodbyes, carrying small bundles and wearing expressions far too serious for their age. Their departure weakened the house even more, stripping it of the last remnants of childhood that once echoed through its rooms. Now it was just Adaora and her father, two grieving souls trying to navigate a world that no longer made sense. One evening, as dusk bled into night and the village grew quiet, her father sat beside her with a heaviness she had never seen on him before. His voice trembled when he finally spoke, as though forcing the words into existence cost him something precious. "My daughter," he whispered, "this place is drowning us. If you stay here, it will drown you too." He paused, swallowing the pain in his throat. "Your future is not here. The city may give you what this village never could." His eyes glistened with guilt, but Adaora saw the truth beneath it. This was not abandonment. It was an act of desperate protection. The next morning, she prepared to leave. She tied her mother's wrapper firmly around her waist, letting its familiar weight anchor her trembling heart. She gathered a few clothes, a small drinking container, and the courage she had been stitching together since the day her mother died. Her father held her hands for a long moment, tracing her fingers as though memorizing them. "Forgive me," he murmured, "but I must let you go before life takes more from you than it already has." She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, committing the embrace to memory, before turning toward the dusty road that awaited her. Her journey to the city unfolded slowly, marked by harsh sunlight, long stretches of silence, and the quiet strength that comes from having no choice but to continue forward. She slept under trees, shared water with strangers, and reminded herself repeatedly that she was fighting for a life her mother would have wanted for her. By the time she reached the city, she felt as though she had stepped into another world, one overwhelming in scale, noise, and pace. This place did not care where she came from. It cared only about who could keep up. And Adeora, despite her fear, refused to let the city break her spirit. Days passed with relentless rejection. Door after door closed in her face. People looked at her and saw only a village girl with no place in their busy world. She slept on cold shop steps, her body aching, her hope thinning, but never disappearing completely. She was close to collapse when a gatekeeper from a large compound approached her with cautious interest. He had seen her searching, waiting, returning day after day. "You want work?" he asked gently. Adeora nodded with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "Follow me," he said. "There is a house that may take you in." She stepped through the mansion gates, believing she had found the safety she desperately needed, unaware that the lessons awaiting her inside would test her spirit, reshape her identity, and push her toward a destiny far larger than anything she had ever imagined. A mansion can shimmer like a promise, its polished surfaces whispering of comfort and safety, yet holding a darkness few ever notice. When Adeora stepped through its gleaming doorway, the world seemed to transform. Wealth stretched before her in forms she had never imagined, dazzling in its shine and intimidating in its perfection. But even before she took her first breath inside that house, something in her sensed that beauty could be deceptive. The air itself felt staged, as though hiding truths beneath the quiet hum of luxury. The mansion was unlike anything Adeora had ever seen, its chandeliers hanging like captured stars, its corridors wide enough to swallow every home in her village. But beneath its grandeur, a coldness lingered. The walls, though adorned with elegant paintings and polished wood, seemed to echo with a tension that had nothing to do with design. The family moved through the house like actors bound by a script they no longer believed in. Their voices carried tones of impatience, their footsteps the rhythm of unresolved frustration. Adeora quickly sensed that money could buy comfort, but not peace. From her first day, her routine unfolded with relentless precision. She woke before the sun touched the windows and worked until long after darkness settled outside. Her tasks stretched endlessly, scrubbing floors that already shined, polishing surfaces that already gleamed, and maintaining an order that seemed less about cleanliness and more about control. Each room demanded its own rules, each object its own care. The mansion felt alive, not in a warm, welcoming way, but in a way that expected her to bend to its rhythms without faltering. Meals were never shared. They were leftovers passed to her without acknowledgement. She ate quickly in the dim corner of the kitchen, fully aware that her presence was tolerated only so long as she remained invisible. At night, she returned to her cramped storage room, where a thin mat and a small lantern offered the only comfort she could claim as her own. Yet she never allowed despair to settle in her chest. She understood hardship. She understood sacrifice. What she did not understand was the strange, brittle world she had stepped into, the world of wealth and its quiet fractures. Over time, the house revealed itself in ways she had not expected. Arguments erupted behind closed doors, their sharp edges slicing through the otherwise orderly quiet. She heard whispers about dwindling accounts, uncertain investments, and business decisions gone wrong. She noticed how the master of the house paced the study late at night, his voice low and strained during hushed phone calls. She watched the mistress stare at letters with a tension that tightened her jaw and dimmed the sharpness of her gaze. These glimpses into their private struggles carved new understanding into Adeora's mind. Wealth did not shield people from fear. It merely disguised it. She worked silently, observing without judgment. She began to notice patterns, how financial trouble changed the tone of a household, how pride prevented honest conversations, how desperation hid beneath polished appearances. What others saw as chores, she treated as opportunities to understand an unfamiliar world from the inside. She paid attention to the documents scattered across desks, the books in the library, the names mentioned in arguments. She learned the language of wealth without anyone realizing she was listening. Her pain sharpened her perception rather than weakening it. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment where she was reminded of her low place became another lesson in human nature. She studied the family's anxieties the way she once studied her school books, with focus, curiosity, and an instinctive sense that this knowledge was a doorway to something larger. The mansion became a strange classroom, one where lessons arrived wrapped in tension and silence rather than chalk and pages. And yet, she welcomed every lesson, storing it carefully like a tool she might one day need. Still, beneath her quiet determination, a growing awareness stirred. Something was unraveling inside that home. The cracks in the family's unity deepened each day, and the air around the mansion grew heavier, as though waiting for an unspoken truth to surface. Adiora felt it long before she understood it. The sharp shift in tone, the hurried steps, the way the master locked himself in the study more often, and how the mistress avoided his gaze. Something significant was approaching, something that would reshape not only their lives, but hers as well. And one late night, as she lingered near the study door with a tray in her hands, a sudden burst of frantic voices reached her, the kind of voices that carried secrets not meant for servants to hear, secrets that would hand her knowledge more powerful than comfort and ignite a change she could never undo. Sometimes, the shift between who a person is and who they are meant to become happens not with a dramatic event, but with a sound, a whisper, a conversation not meant for their ears. For Adiora, it was a single night when the mansion's silence cracked open, just long enough for a few desperate words to escape, words that would ignite a fire she didn't yet understand. It was in that quiet, almost accidental moment that the first fragile thread of her future empire began to weave itself into existence. On a night when exhaustion pressed heavily against her body, Adiora moved quietly from room to room, completing the final tasks that marked the end of her long day. The house had settled into its usual late-evening stillness, a silence that disguised the tension simmering beneath the surface. She had learned to navigate the mansion without making a sound, understanding instinctively that her presence should be felt only through the completion of her work, not through the sound of her footsteps. She was wiping down a polished table near the study when voices suddenly rose on the other side of the door, sharp, hurried, and dripping with urgency. Her hands froze mid-motion. She wasn't trying to listen. But the intensity in those voices, the strain wrapped around each word, pulled her attention before she could stop herself. She recognized the tone first. Fear, the kind the wealthy tried desperately to hide. Then came the words, strange and unfamiliar, spoken with an agitation she had never heard from her employers before. Liabilities, losses, shares collapsing, contracts falling through. The terms hung in the air like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. She did not know what they meant, but something in their weight thrilled her curiosity. She leaned slightly closer, not out of disobedience, but from an instinct she couldn't ignore. There was a rhythm to the conversation, a pattern in the panic, revealing the shape of something she sensed was important. She heard numbers thrown out like lifelines, strategies debated with tight voices, and the tense argument of two people who suddenly realized how fragile their fortune truly was. In that moment, the mansion did not seem powerful. It seemed desperate, and Adara felt, for the first time, that knowledge, not wealth, was the true engine behind the world she had only watched from the shadows. The argument continued for several minutes before ending abruptly. She stepped back, heart pounding with an odd mixture of fear and fascination. She finished her tasks with a mind far more awake than her body, the unfamiliar terms replaying in her thoughts long after she returned to her small storage room. She lay on her thin mat, staring into the darkness, repeating each word carefully, tasting their shape, imagining their meaning. Unknown to her, that night marked the beginning of her awakening, the moment she realized that the world was made of systems she had never been taught. systems she was now determined to understand. By morning, curiosity had evolved into something sharper. While cleaning the living room, she noticed a pile of discarded newspapers, torn envelopes, and outdated financial brochures lying near the trash. Her heart thudded with the daring thought of what she might find inside. She waited until the hallway emptied before kneeling and sifting through the papers. Charts, graphs, business terms, names of companies. None of it made sense, yet all of it felt like a language she was suddenly desperate to learn. She folded several pages and hid them beneath her apron, carrying them to her room with the kind of secrecy one reserves for treasure. At night, while the family slept, she lit her lantern and unfolded the papers slowly, studying each line with unwavering focus. Confusion came first, thick and discouraging. But Adaora had never been a girl to surrender to difficulty. She traced sentences with her finger, repeated unfamiliar words aloud, and tried to understand the structure behind the numbers. Slowly, patterns began to emerge, not complete, not clear, but enough to spark recognition. She felt something shift inside her, the same quiet thrill she had felt as a child when learning to read. Only this time, it wasn't letters forming stories. It was knowledge revealing power. Night after night, she studied those scraps of information, teaching herself the basics of a world that had never been meant for someone like her. With each passing day, she felt her mind stretching, sharpening, expanding. The mansion remained cold and demanding, yet she began to see it differently, not as a place trapping her, but as a place teaching her. She observed everything now: papers on desks, snippets of conversations, changes in tone when money was mentioned. Knowledge was no longer a distant dream. It was something she was slowly, quietly claiming. But even as her understanding grew, the tension inside the mansion deepened. The arguments became more frequent, the whispers sharper, the expressions tighter. She sensed the unraveling long before anyone admitted it. Wealth, she realized, could vanish as quickly as breath in the cold air. And when the family finally lost the fortune they clung to so desperately, their world collapsed with a thunder she could not escape, pushing her back into the streets with nothing but the knowledge she had gathered, and a fire inside her that refused to die. There are days that break a person so sharply that the pieces never quite fit the same way again. Yet sometimes, those same days carve open a doorway to a new beginning. For Adaora, the moment she was pushed out of the mansion was not just an ending. It was the first spark of a purpose she had not yet recognized. In the terrifying stillness that followed her dismissal, something within her began to shift, preparing her for a future she could not yet see. The collapse of the family's fortunes came like a storm that refused to wait for shelter. Arguments grew heavier, accusations flew, and panic began to shape every corner of the once polished mansion. Adaora sensed the unraveling long before the final blow arrived. She watched the family grasp at solutions they did not understand, clinging to pride as their world crumbled beneath their feet. And then, when desperation found no more shadows to hide in, it searched for someone to blame. It found her. They accused her of being a burden, a distraction, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Their words were sharp, but the swiftness of their decision cut even deeper. Without apology, without thought, they stripped her of her place and sent her away with nothing, not even the salary she had faithfully earned. Stepping outside the gates felt like stepping back into the past she thought she had left behind, a life defined by uncertainty, hunger, and fear. But now the pain carried a different weight, heavier for the effort she had already invested, heavier because she had tasted a world beyond her village and had begun to believe she could shape her own path. The road stretched before her like a test she had not been prepared for. She walked with trembling legs, the emptiness of her pockets mirroring the emptiness in her stomach. Yet beneath the fear, there was something else, something quiet, something stubborn. Her first night on the streets was a reminder that survival demanded more than strength. It demanded adaptation. She slept near the entrance of the marketplace, listening to the distant conversations of traders and the rustling sounds of night creatures searching for scraps. Hunger tugged at her, and anxiety pulsed like a heartbeat she couldn't calm. But even as fatigue dragged her down, she refused to fold into despair. Every lesson she had absorbed inside the mansion still lingered in her mind, whispering reminders that knowledge had already begun to change her, even if she hadn't yet learned how to use it. At dawn, the market stirred to life. Voices rose, deals were made, goods were unpacked, and the day's business began its restless rhythm. Adiora approached stall after stall, offering to carry water, sweep, sort produce, anything that might earn her even a coin. Most traders waved her off without a second glance. A few paused long enough to consider, but ultimately dismissed her. By midday, her legs ached, her hope thinned, and exhaustion pressed against her resolve. But she continued. She had learned to observe patterns. Even here, who needed help, who was overwhelmed, who was losing time because of scattered tasks. Finally, a trader selling spices paused long enough to truly look at her. He studied her face, her steady posture, her careful manner of speaking. He handed her a small pile of clothes and asked if she could wash them. She nodded with gratitude that nearly overwhelmed her, and by nightfall, she had completed the work with such care and precision that the trader immediately spread her name among his neighbors. By the end of the week, she had become a familiar presence, collecting small bundles of clothing from vendors and returning them spotless, neatly folded, and on time. The payment was barely enough to survive, but it was hers, earned by her hands, her discipline, her grit. For the first time, she felt a quiet sense of ownership, a spark of independence that warmed her even when hunger persisted. Even in exhaustion, she kept the financial scraps she had saved from the mansion tucked beneath her clothes, studying them whenever she found a quiet corner. The market noise faded each time she opened those papers, replaced by the steady hum of her growing awareness. She did not understand everything yet, but she understood enough to know that these ideas, these words, these patterns carried power she could no longer ignore. And one evening, as she sat near the old bookstall with her papers spread across her knees, a man with wise eyes paused, noticing not her poverty, but her hunger to understand. And in that moment, the path of her destiny began to shift once again. Sometimes destiny steps toward a person so quietly that its arrival feels accidental. For Adiora, it came in the shape of an old man sitting behind a cluttered wooden table, surrounded by books no one seemed interested in buying. She expected nothing from him, not compassion, not opportunity, not recognition. She sought only small coins to survive. Yet the stranger saw something in her eyes that she did not yet dare to name. A hunger that had nothing to do with food, a spark waiting for the slightest breeze to ignite. The marketplace had become Adiora's world, alive with noise and movement from the early hours of dawn until long after dusk. She washed clothes, cleaned stalls, and helped vendors organize their goods, earning just enough to keep going. Yet even in the blur of exhaustion, her mind remained restless. She often paused near the old bookstall at the far end of the market, drawn to the sight of books stacked in uneven piles, their covers faded and corners bent. Something about them called to her, reminding her of the curiosity she had nurtured as a child, long before hardship demanded her full strength. The bookseller, a man of quiet patience and observant eyes, noticed her long before she realized she was being watched. He saw the way she lingered near the stall without touching anything, the way her gaze settled on pages filled with information she could not yet decipher. He noticed her returning day after day, always at a distance, always hesitant, always drawn by something deeper than curiosity. She behaved like someone who believed she had no right to the world inside those books. One evening, when the rush of the market softened and traders began packing their goods, the old man called her over with a gentle wave. His voice carried no urgency, only an invitation that felt strangely safe. She approached slowly, unsure of why he wanted her attention. Without asking her name or her story, he reached beneath the table and lifted a small stack of worn books. Their pages were yellowed with time, edges frayed, but there was a dignity in the way he handled them, as though they still carried power. "These have no buyers anymore," he said, studying her expression with quiet accuracy. "But they still have value, and value should not be wasted." He placed the books in her hands before she could protest. She stared at them, overwhelmed by confusion. No one had given her anything freely in a very long time. She tried to refuse, insisting she could not pay, but he silenced her with a small shake of his head. "You are not paying with money," he said softly. "You are paying with effort. I can see that you are ready to learn. So learn." When she returned to her small corner of the market that night, she opened the first book with trembling hands. It was filled with terms she had seen in newspapers, but never understood. Pricing models, customer perception, reinvestment cycles, profit margins, service standards. The words intimidated her at first, but she refused to be discouraged. She read slowly, using the dim glow of a borrowed lantern, tracing each sentence with determination. And as the nights passed, something extraordinary happened. Confusion began to give way to comprehension. She learned how businesses grew, how they failed, how they earned trust, and how small decisions shaped large outcomes. She discovered the logic behind customer loyalty and the power of reinvesting earnings, rather than consuming them. She learned that strategy was not some distant skill reserved for the wealthy. It was a discipline anyone could master with patience and effort. These books became her new teachers, each chapter expanding her mind beyond the limits of the marketplace. The old bookseller continued to observe her transformation without interfering. He saw the light in her eyes strengthen, the way her questions became more precise, the way her posture shifted from timid uncertainty to quiet confidence. And though he never asked what she intended to do with this newfound knowledge, he knew that ambition was forming inside her. Steady, deliberate, unstoppable. As weeks passed, Adaora felt something shift deep within her. She washed clothes with more purpose now, recognizing that every coin earned could become a seed for something bigger. She spoke differently, planned differently, thought differently. For the first time in her life, she understood that knowledge was not just power, it was freedom, the kind that could reshape her entire existence if she dared to use it. And one night, as she closed the last book with trembling hands and looked out at the sleeping market, she felt an idea rising within her, an idea so bold, so unprecedented for someone like her, that it sent a rush of fear and excitement through her veins. It was time, she realized, to build something of her own. Great dreams rarely announce themselves loudly. They slip, quietly, into a person's life, disguised as small decisions made in moments of necessity. For Adaora, her empire began not with wealth or opportunity, but with soap, water, and the fierce determination to rise above the life she had been handed. In the hum of the crowded marketplace, surrounded by noise, dust, and constant struggle, she took her first step toward a future she could barely imagine. The washing work had begun as a desperate attempt to survive, but Adaora soon realized it offered something more, a chance to shape her own path with her own hands. She approached each task with a discipline so rare in the marketplace that traders began to take notice. She washed clothes with an almost reverent attention to detail, scrubbing gently yet thoroughly, rinsing until the water ran clear, and folding everything neatly with a precision that reflected the pride she carried in her work. The vendors appreciated not only the quality, but the reliability. In a world where many struggled to remain consistent, Adaora became known for punctuality, respect, and dedication. Her reputation grew slowly but steadily. Traders who once ignored her now searched for her, handing over their garments with trust and gratitude. The piles of clothing increased, and with them came an understanding. She could no longer handle the workload alone. Hiring helpers felt like a bold step, almost too bold for someone who had slept on the street weeks earlier. Yet she embraced the decision with quiet confidence. She selected 2 young women who reminded her of herself, hardworking, attentive, willing to learn. She trained them with the same methods she had taught herself: attention to detail, consistency, honesty, and pride in small beginnings. What separated Adaora from others was not simply her work ethic, but the way she treated every coin she earned. Instead of spending even a portion of it on comfort or reward, she reinvested everything back into her little operation. She bought better washing bowls, stronger brushes, quality soap, and clean cloths. She purchased water at higher prices when queues grew too long, ensuring her service never faltered. Every improvement she made strengthened her small business, building a foundation she did not yet realize would support a far greater future. The marketplace became her classroom, each day offering new lessons hidden inside routine. She learned the rhythm of customer needs, the power of respect, and the importance of delivering more than what was expected. She noticed how vendors responded to kindness, how consistency earned loyalty, and how humility opened doors even when poverty threatened to close them. Her small washing service became known not just for speed and quality, but for integrity, a reputation money could not buy. As weeks turned into months, Adaora found herself in a position she had never known before. She was trusted. Traders recommended her to others. Customers she had never met approached her with confidence. Her name traveled across stalls, from the spice seller to the fruit vendors, from the fabric merchants to the fishmongers. In a world where survival was often a daily fight, her business became a small symbol of reliability. With each passing day, her confidence grew, not loudly or arrogantly, but with a steady conviction that surprised even her. She began organizing her earnings, noting small expenses, predicting daily income, and tracking growth the way she had read about in the books the old man had given her. She applied concepts she once struggled to understand: reinvestment, customer value, service differentiation. She realized she was not just washing clothes. She was building something meaningful, something that felt like the first chapter of a life she had only dared to dream about. But success, even in its smallest form, often brings new challenges, opportunities disguised as tests. And one afternoon, as she folded the last set of clothes and felt the weight of her expanding business settle into her thoughts, she noticed a group of well-dressed men approaching the market, men whose arrival would pull her out of the bustling stalls and drag her name toward a world far bigger and far more demanding than she had ever imagined. There are moments in life when a person steps into a room they were never expected to enter, yet somehow the room feels as though it has been waiting for them. For Adaora, the day she walked into a corporate boardroom was not just a crossing of space, it was a crossing of destiny. The marketplace dust still clung to her past, yet her mind carried visions shaped by nights of relentless study. She had risen from the margins, but now the world she once watched from afar was about to look back at her. The first whisper of opportunity came quietly, slipping into her life as most profound chances often do. A vendor mentioned that a nearby company needed reliable cleaning contractors. Another confirmed it. A third insisted she apply. These suggestions were not born out of flattery. They came from genuine respect for her discipline and the unwavering quality of her work. Something inside her stirred at the idea. It felt daring, almost unreasonable, but it also felt like the kind of opportunity her newfound knowledge had been preparing her for. She had learned enough to know that business rewarded those who stepped forward boldly, not those who waited to be invited. With trembling resolve, she spent nights drafting a proposal using the concepts she had absorbed from the old books. She outlined pricing structures, service plans, employee training, quality assurance, and turnaround time. Her handwriting was careful, her tone firm, her arguments shaped with precision. It was a document born not from experience, but from pure discipline and attention to detail. She had no office, no machines, no uniforms, only a vision sharpened by ambition. Yet the strength of her preparation gave her courage she did not know she possessed. When she finally entered the company's reception hall, fear and awe battled inside her chest. She had never stood in a room with glass walls, polished floors, or people dressed in crisp suits moving with purpose. She clutched her proposal as though it were the anchor holding her together. The secretary studied her briefly, perhaps expecting her to ask for directions or supplies. But when Adara announced she was there for a meeting concerning a service contract, something shifted. Her voice held no apology, only quiet determination. Inside the boardroom, several managers exchanged skeptical glances. They saw a young woman dressed modestly, hands calloused from labor, and eyes carrying the sharpness of someone who had learned more from hardship than from privilege. They did not believe she belonged there, yet she stood with a calmness that surprised them. And when she began her presentation, something remarkable happened. Their skepticism faltered. Adara spoke with clarity, born from intense study. She explained her service model, highlighted her track record in the marketplace, and demonstrated an understanding of professional cleaning beyond what anyone expected. She described her processes with precision, her training system with confidence, and her reinvestment strategy with a level of discipline rare even among established contractors. Every sentence revealed the depth of her observation and the sincerity of her craft. She was not trying to impress them. She was simply sharing what she had built. When she finished, the room went quiet. The managers looked at one another, surprised by the strength of her proposal. What she lacked in experience, she compensated for with intelligence, structure, and a kind of authenticity that could not be faked. They awarded her a trial contract, not out of charity, but because she had genuinely earned it. As she walked out of the building, something inside her expanded. Later that night, sitting beneath the dim light of her lantern, she allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. The success of that first contract rippled into others. Satisfied clients recommended her, and soon she needed more supplies, more helpers, and more organization. She rented a small storage space, purchased equipment, and hired additional workers. Her leadership was firm, yet respectful, shaped by the lessons of her past. She valued punctuality, discipline, and honest communication, and in return, her team respected her deeply. What had begun as a desperate survival effort in the market had now become a recognizable company with a growing list of clients. But success, like a flame, casts shadows, and as her company expanded, whispers of jealousy began circulating through her staff, quiet murmurs that soon turned into actions, creeping beneath the surface of her rising empire, preparing to strike just when she believed the hardest battles were behind her. Success can draw admiration, but it also awakens shadows in the hearts of those who feel threatened by another's rise. For Adara, the greatest danger did not come from rival companies or competitive bids. It crept in quietly from the very people she had chosen to lift with her. The ones she trusted, the ones she trained, the ones she believed would walk beside her, began planting seeds of sabotage that threatened to tear apart everything she had built. And in those fragile days, she learned that the true test of leadership wasn't growth. It was survival. At first, the signs were subtle enough to dismiss. A misplaced invoice here, a missed shift there, a client complaint that seemed more like misunderstanding than deceit. Adara tried to keep faith in her team, trusting the loyalty she thought she had earned through fairness and discipline. But soon the inconsistencies grew too frequent, too sharp to ignore. Cleanings scheduled for the morning were never attended. Supplies she had purchased vanished before reaching job sites. Clients she had served faithfully for months called with abrupt disappointment, claiming her company had not fulfilled agreements she personally signed off on. With every complaint, A quiet ache spread across her chest, because she recognized the pattern, not of failure, but of intent. Trust, she realized, could shatter as quickly as it was formed. The employees she had welcomed with patience and guidance began to undermine her, driven by jealousy and greed. They whispered lies to clients, pocketed company funds, delayed essential tasks, and tried to distort her reputation in the corporate world she had fought so hard to enter. Their betrayal felt sharp not because of the damage they caused, but because of the faith she had placed in them. Revenue began to drop. Contracts she depended on grew fragile. The company she had nurtured with discipline and tears seemed to wobble at its foundation. But Adaora refused to crumble. She had survived hunger, homelessness, and the cruelty of being dismissed without dignity. She would not allow betrayal to dictate her destiny now. She drew from the strength she had built over years of hardship and approached the situation with the clarity and calm of someone who had learned to think through pain, not collapse beneath it. She initiated a full internal audit, something no one expected from a woman who had once washed clothes for pennies. She reviewed financial records, cross-checked supply purchases, traced delivery routes, and examined job reports with unrelenting focus. She questioned timelines, cross-referenced client complaints, and quietly observed employee behavior before making her move. What she uncovered was worse than she imagined: missing funds, forged signatures, withheld job reports, and deliberate attempts to sabotage high-value contracts. The discovery burned, but the clarity it brought steadied her. With unwavering resolve, she removed every saboteur from her workforce. There were no raised voices, no scenes of dramatics, only firm decisions delivered with a steady voice. She reorganized her management structure, placed trustworthy employees in leadership positions, and implemented a rigorous reporting system that eliminated the gaps the betrayers had used. Her company, once shaken by internal chaos, slowly began to regain its balance. What she didn't know, however, was that her struggle had not gone unnoticed. Investors she had never met had been quietly watching her progress for months, observing her rise from a market cleaner to a corporate contractor with unusual discipline and growth. But it was her response to crisis, her ability to act decisively yet honorably, to rebuild without bitterness, to lead without losing herself, that truly captured their attention. Where others saw a woman battered by betrayal, investors saw a strategist, a fighter, a visionary capable of navigating storms most seasoned entrepreneurs feared. Her reputation, rather than collapsing, began to strengthen. Whispers spread through the business community, not of failure, but of resilience. Clients admired the transparency with which she addressed the crisis. Vendors appreciated the order she restored. Employees who remained loyal found renewed purpose under her leadership, and slowly, contracts began to return, not out of charity, but out of respect for the discipline she refused to abandon. And just as her company regained its footing, a message arrived from an unexpected source, an international firm seeking partners for a project so large, so far-reaching, that it threatened to pull Adaora into a world she had never imagined she would stand in, let alone lead. Some opportunities arrive like whispers, others like storms that rearrange a person's destiny in a single sweep. The offer that reached Adaora was neither gentle nor subtle. It was a force powerful enough to alter the future of an entire nation. She, the girl who had once washed clothes for coins in a crowded market, now stood at the edge of a billion-dollar opportunity, one that could redefine not just her story, but the story of countless people who had never known true possibility. And as the news settled into her hands, she felt both the weight and the wonder of how far she had come. The global corporation seeking local partners was known across continents. Their infrastructure project was enormous: roads, buildings, sanitation systems, transport hubs, projects that demanded precision, efficiency, and unwavering reliability. Dozens of established companies submitted proposals, many of them giants with decades of experience and deep networks that reached into the highest levels of power. Adiora's company, though rising quickly, was still young compared to the others. To many observers, her inclusion in the shortlisted candidates felt like a curious exception, an unexpected entry in a race typically reserved for long-standing corporate titans. Yet behind her modest office doors, Adiora remained calm. She understood that knowledge, preparation, discipline, and the clarity she had sharpened through hardship mattered more than reputation. She approached the project with the same determination she once used to wash clothes in the marketplace: careful attention, impeccable detail, and a refusal to cut corners. She analyzed the contract specifications line by line, studying logistics, scheduling, workforce management, safety protocols, and sustainability measures. Every insight she had ever gathered, from books, from mentors, from failures, from betrayal, became a tool she used to craft the most compelling proposal her company had ever produced. When the day of the presentation arrived, she walked into the international boardroom with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place, not through privilege, but through relentless effort. The executives sitting across from her were seasoned, their expressions measured and analytical. Many expected her to falter, to present nervously, to show the greenness they assumed defined her. Instead, she opened her pitch with a steadiness that immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room. Her voice was calm, her explanations clear, her strategy grounded in logic and innovation. She presented logistical plans that minimized waste, proposed workforce systems that ensured productivity, and introduced maintenance structures that reduced long-term operating costs. She spoke not with the polish of someone trained in elite institutions, but with the authenticity of someone who knew the realities of the ground and understood the people who would actually be doing the work. Her vision balanced practicality with ambition, and her quiet conviction left no space for doubt. By the time she finished, the room was silent, not in skepticism, but in the stunned recognition that they had underestimated her. They saw someone who combined intelligence with humility, discipline with creativity, and ambition with responsibility. And when the executive chairman finally spoke, announcing that her company had been selected, Adiora felt the weight of history shift beneath her feet. The news spread across the nation within days. A woman who had once washed clothes for coins had now secured one of the largest infrastructure contracts in the country's history. Journalists sought interviews, analysts praised her rise, and communities across the region celebrated her victory as if it were their own. Her company expanded rapidly, hiring thousands, building facilities, and branching into new sectors: construction, sanitation, logistics, energy. Wealth flowed in, but Adiora handled it with the same discipline that had guided every earlier stage of her journey. And yet, amid the celebrations and the overwhelming success, something deeper stirred within her, a quiet reminder from the past that no achievement could silence. For even as she reached the height of national influence, a promise made long ago whispered back into her life, calling her home, urging her to return to the place where her story first began and complete what her heart had never forgotten. Recognition is a strange companion. It can lift a person to unimaginable heights, yet still leave their heart rooted in the soil that shaped them. As Adiora's wealth and influence grew, the world saw only the billionaire entrepreneur, the visionary leader, the woman who had rewritten the nation's expectations. But beneath the layers of success, she remained tethered to the quiet memories of her childhood, carrying Ugwuta in her heart, like a sacred anchor. Even as her name echoed across continents, she knew her story had never truly belonged to wealth alone. It belonged to the journey that forged her. With her newfound resources, Adiora moved with purpose, directing her success not just toward expansion, but toward transformation. She launched scholarship programs for children who reminded her of herself, eager minds trapped by circumstance. She established women's empowerment centers across rural regions, offering training, financial guidance, and safe spaces for women who had never been told they deserved more than survival. She invested in rural education, building schools where dusty paths once marked forgotten ambitions. Each initiative reflected not pride, but gratitude, an act of respect for the village that had unknowingly prepared her for greatness. Her businesses spread beyond national borders, entering global markets with the same steady discipline that had guided her first corporate contract. International partners admired her clarity of vision, her ability to navigate complex systems, and the calm authority she carried into every negotiation. Within a few years, Adaora became a symbol of what determined leadership looked like when rooted in humility rather than ego. Economic analysts chronicled her journey with awe, calling her the richest woman the nation had ever produced. But the numbers, impressive as they were, did not define her. Adaora had learned long ago that wealth meant little if it did not serve a larger purpose. Fame brought invitations, awards, and ceremonies she attended with grace, but she always returned to the quiet moments that grounded her. She kept her mother's wrapper in her private study, the fabric folded neatly as a reminder of the woman whose strength had shaped her earliest dreams. She visited schools she built unannounced, speaking with the children as though she were one of them. Workers in her companies described her as firm but compassionate, a leader who remembered names, asked about families, and moved through rooms without needing to prove her authority. Yet even as the nation embraced her as an icon, Adaora often found her thoughts drifting back to Ugwuta, the place where her dreams began as fragile whispers. She remembered the cracked walls of her childhood home, the dusty fields her father fought to cultivate, the river path she traveled each morning with water pots, balanced on her head. Those memories were not burdens. They were the foundation of her resilience, the quiet heartbeat beneath every decision she made. And though she had built an empire, changed lives, and reshaped industries, one truth remained. She had not yet returned to the village that raised her. She had promised herself she would return only when she could bring more than words, when she could offer the kind of change her community had been denied for generations. And now, as her influence reached its highest peak, she felt that promise rise within her again, urging her to go back, to stand once more on the soil of her childhood, and to complete the part of her journey that success alone could never fulfill. When Adaora walked away from her village years earlier, she did so with nothing but a worn wrapper around her waist, and a fragile hope she guarded like breath. She left unnoticed, uncelebrated, and unremarkable. A child shaped by hardship, stepping into a world that offered no guarantees. But destiny has a way of honoring those who refuse to surrender. And now, as her convoy approached the familiar dusty road of Ugwuta, she returned not as the girl who once carried water pots at dawn, but as the woman who would transform everything the village had ever known. The news of her return spread faster than the Harmattan winds. By the time she stepped out of the vehicle, the entire village had gathered. Men who remembered her father's struggles, women who once consoled her mother, children who had only heard her story in awe-filled whispers. Tears glistened in the eyes of elders, expressions of disbelief mixed with pride as they welcomed her with trembling hands. The same earth that had once carried her small, determined footsteps now embraced her with the reverence reserved for long-awaited heroes. And for the first time in many years, Adaora felt the weight of her journey settle into her chest, not as sorrow, but as gratitude. She moved through the village slowly, absorbing every detail, the newly repaired paths, the huts that leaned less precariously than before, the hopeful chatter of children who watched her with shining eyes. Then came the transformation she had long prepared for, the unveiling of her projects. With the efficiency of someone who had mastered large-scale development, Adaora had built schools equipped with modern classrooms, libraries stocked with books, and computer labs that opened the world to children who once had no access to even basic education. She constructed a health center staffed with trained medical professionals, offering the community something they had lacked for generations: accessible care and a place where life no longer hung by a thread. Water systems followed, stretching across the village like veins, carrying life to every corner. Clean water flowed from taps instead of distant wells, relieving women and children from the long, exhausting daily treks they had endured for generations. She developed small business centers, offering training, microloans, and mentorship programs that empowered villagers to start their own ventures. Within months, Ugwuta began to shift from a place struggling to survive into a community learning to thrive. Yet amid all the applause and progress, Adaora sought a quieter moment. She walked alone to the small graveyard at the edge of the village, where the earth held the memory of her mother. Kneeling before the modest mound, she placed her hand gently on the soil, her eyes soft with both longing and peace. She whispered words only the wind carried, gratitude for the strength her mother had passed on, for the lessons woven into hardship, and for the quiet courage that had guided her through every chapter of her life. In that stillness, Adaora felt a completeness she had not known she was missing, a sense that her journey had circled home to its true beginning. The village flourished in the months that followed. Children attended school with excitement rather than obligation. Families had access to health care for the first time in memory. Women who once carried the heaviest burdens now ran businesses, spoke in community meetings, and planned futures unbound by old limitations. Each change traced its roots back to Adaora, not as a savior, but as a testament to what relentless determination could achieve. Her story spread far beyond the borders of the region, inspiring people across the nation who saw in her a living symbol of possibility. Despite all she had accomplished, Adaora remained grounded. She visited the village often, meeting students, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and reminding the community that transformation wasn't a gift bestowed from above. It was a collective rising, a shared awakening. And as she stood overlooking the land that had once held her childhood struggles, she knew the narrative of her life had become larger than her own triumph. It belonged to every person who believed that beginnings do not dictate endings. And so, the maid who once worked for Pennies became the woman who reshaped her people's destiny, leaving behind a legacy that carried one powerful truth: greatness is not defined by where a person starts, but by how fiercely they choose to rise. If stories of courage rising from impossible beginnings move your spirit, then stay with this channel, because more journeys like Adaora's are waiting to be told. Your support keeps these powerful African tales alive, so make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that greatness grows from struggle. And if you're ready for the next chapter of inspiration, turn on notifications. Your next unforgettable story is already on its way.